When you talk greatest sixth man of all time, Vinnie Johnson's name isn't mentioned enough, but maybe you know him better by his nickname.
Vinnie Johnson, who's known as the microwave and can light it up in a hurry. Gonna have to get out and play a little bit better than that. The microwave is starting to heat up.
He gets in one of those zones, you can triple team that man and you cannot stop him.
When the Detroit Pistons needed a bucket, they tossed the ball into the microwave.
Vinnie Johnson just took 2 points that time.
He is a spark on this team. You know what Chuck Daly says about Vinnie Johnson? Thank God for Vinnie.
While the bad boys were beating up opponents, Vinnie was doing his damage on the scorecard, only needing a few minutes to take over a game.
And when you get a man like Vinnie on fire, the good defenders can't stop him, much less the mediocre ones.
16 for Vinnie, a 14-point second quarter.
You can talk about great players in this league, but when Vinnie Johnson gets in that zone, there's no player any more dominant offensively.
Johnson, 28 points. He is unconscious.
Elite one-on-one skills and a high-release jumper had defenders looking hopeless to stop him.
Vinnie Johnson rises up over him and hits. That's a hallmark of his game, the ability to shoot over taller defenders.
I'm trying to think of an analogy, almost like an avalanche. You know it's coming. You can see it coming. You know, nothing you can do, and it just blows you over. Vinny's coming at you. You know he's going to shoot the ball. You got to try to do something. Maybe you foul him. He makes the shot anyway.
The epitome of a big game player. Calling him clutch would be an understatement.
Vinnie Johnson with 1 second to go. His shot is good.
It's 92-90. The microwave scores with 0.7 seconds left in the game.
Playing his role to perfection in the name of winning.
That's how he contributes to this ball club off the bench. One of the best sixth men in the NBA.
Vinnie Johnson, who Bill Laimbeer says is the best guard in the NBA, never to make an all-star team.
And at the end of the day, the game is about getting buckets. And few did it better than Vinnie Johnson.
Just win, baby, whatever it takes.
Let's jog your memory. Coming up in Brooklyn, New York, Vinnie Johnson attended Franklin D. Roosevelt High. Johnson was undersized at just 5'11", but he was still one of the best players in the metropolitan area, both in the gym and on the playgrounds, as the teenager was known around New York as Super Guard. He was also known to have an endless array of moves on the court, things he had picked up playing against the premier competition provided by the playgrounds. And even with his small size, he averaged 25 and 12 as a high school senior. Colleges all over the country were interested, and Johnson was set to go to Arizona State. But his grades weren't up to par. Johnson would still be playing college ball, but now it would be in Waco, Texas, for McLennan Community College, after Johnson was impressed by MCC coach Johnny Carter, a young coach who both knew the game, yet also knew that players made mistakes. But from his very first game, it didn't look like Johnson was going to make too many mistakes. VJ dropped 30 points in the first half of his Highlanders debut, finishing with 37 for the game. An assistant coach for Baylor would stop in and watch some scrimmages from time to time, and he knew immediately that Vinnie Johnson had the potential to be great. For the season, the barely 6-foot freshman was the Highlanders' starting point guard and averaged about 27 points, 7 boards, and 6 assists. Not just the team's best scorer, but one of the best in the country, and already was growing his reputation as a clutch performer, a player who came through when the pressure was high. His sophomore season was much of the same. He kicked off the year with 42 points in a win. Somehow, he was even better than last season. Once again, he was a scoring machine, and the now 6'1" guard was even pulling down about 9 boards per game. Some were calling him the best JUCO guard prospect of the 70s, and Johnson was named conference MVP and a JUCO All-American. His grades improved as well. The demand from D1 programs had only grown, but Johnson would stay in Waco. However, Johnson was now a Baylor Bear, playing under new head coach Jim Haller, the same assistant who had seen his potential years earlier. In his first game at the D1 level, Johnson dropped 34 to lead the Bears to a win. Improved competition was no problem for the guard. Johnson's 23-point average was tops in the Southwest Conference, and when he wasn't scoring, he was distributing, finishing second in the conference in assists. The Bears weren't great, and Johnson did everything he could to will them to victories, as they would even turn in a winning record. However, 14 wins and an early conference tourney loss wouldn't be enough for any tournament invites. Johnson's final act would be his most impressive, The senior upped his scoring and assist numbers and even averaged over 2 steals per game. He was again the conference's leading scorer, and after being snubbed last year, he would be a first-team All-Southwest Conference in '79, and did so while overcoming tragedy as he lost his mother in early January of 1979. But with their super guard, Baylor was one of the nation's better offenses, and Johnson saved his best for last, scoring a program record 50 points in the season finale versus TCU. It marked Baylor's 15th win of the year. They advanced to the conference tourney semifinals, but a 1-point loss to Houston would end Johnson's college career. Vinnie left Baylor as a program legend, needing just 2 seasons to be widely considered as the best player to wear the green and gold. He had put Baylor basketball on the map, and in doing so, had plastered his name all over the Bears record book. More importantly, he was a virtual lock to be a first-round selection in the 1979 NBA draft. The real question was, how high would he go? Vinnie Johnson went high, 7th overall to the world champion Seattle SuperSonics. So he went to a good team, but also an established team. And if you're a rookie guard looking for playing time in 1979, Seattle wasn't the place to be. They featured arguably the best backcourt in the league, with the star tandem of Dennis Johnson and Gus Williams. And with veteran Fred Brown still getting good minutes, Vinnie Johnson found himself at the end of the bench. He appeared in just 38 games, almost exclusively in garbage time. But Seattle had a good thing going. They racked up 56 wins and made it all the way to the conference finals. However, their quest for a repeat only went that far, as a Lakers team led by their star rookie would defeat the Sonics in 5, with Johnson's rookie year ending with him averaging about 3 points, 1.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. The backcourt looked a lot different going into the '81 season. Over the summer, Dennis Johnson had been sent to Phoenix, with Seattle receiving Paul Westphal in return. But the Sonics needed a point guard as well, because Gus Williams was a holdout all season.
Well, we'd like to have Gus, but when you see Vinnie Johnson, he's a pretty good player. I think that we won't be hurting back there at all.
So Vinnie Johnson got his chance. The second-year guard started the majority of the season's games, while getting over 28 minutes a night. He showed off that scoring ability, giving the Sonics about 13 points per game on over 53% shooting, and would also lead the team in assists. Even with the losses in the backcourt, Seattle still rolled out a stingy defense. However, injuries prevented their offense from reaching its potential, with a couple starters missing significant time, most notably Westphal, who was limited to just 36 games. So a Sonics team who had reached the previous 3 conference finals wouldn't even make the playoffs. But Vinnie Johnson had shown that he deserved a bigger role, after averaging about 13 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. So Vinnie Johnson had shown that he could handle a starter's load, and was rewarded with a new contract. But now Gus Williams was back, so going into the following season, Johnson returned to a bench role. He took it in stride, and head coach Lenny Wilkins appreciated the scoring that he could give the team off the bench. However, that second unit scoring would only last 7 games. In late November, Detroit sent Greg Kelser to the Sonics, and Seattle sent Vinnie Johnson to the Motor City.
It has seemed almost an endless task for the Detroit Pistons to regain the form that once gave them NBA respectability in the mid-'70s, the days of Bob Lanier, their last playoff venture. But what a big step they've taken with the drafting of 2 number-1 choices, Isiah Thomas of Indiana and Kelly Tripucka of Notre Dame. Together, these 2 rookies have ignited a spark in the Motor City. Thomas, great playmaker, and inside intense play by Tripucka. And the Pistons have already won nearly as many games as they captured the entire season a year ago under coach Scotty Robertson.
Vinnie Johnson was a Detroit Piston, and he was happy to be one. He didn't mind Seattle, but he wanted more playing time, and that's just not something Seattle could offer. However, Pistons head coach Scotty Robertson saw no reason why Johnson couldn't be playing upwards of 30 minutes a night. However, he would still be coming off the bench. The Pistons had a promising rookie duo in Isiah Thomas and Kelly Tripucka, and with John Long rounding out the backcourt, there was no room left for Johnson. Yet it didn't look like there were many minutes either. Upon the Johnson acquisition, Detroit hit a big losing streak, and not long after, Johnson was only getting a few more minutes than he had been in Seattle. He showed he could score, but it was hard for Robertson to figure out where to play him. His skill set didn't exactly match his size.
Got a feeling that if this man was about 3 inches taller, he would be a dynamo in the league because he loves to post up, play in the lane. Just a little bit short to do that in this league.
Robertson had some other criticisms about Johnson's size as well. Not one to mince words, Robertson felt like Vinnie was too fat, so the pair never really saw eye to eye. But Detroit also didn't have a lack of scoring. They did have a lot of problems stopping their opponents. They weren't terrible, but that December losing skid proved to be detrimental, as Detroit finished at 39-43 and missed the playoffs. And Johnson concluded his overall year with averages of about 7.5 points, 2 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Johnson had a full offseason to train with his new team, and he took Robertson's words to heart. He shed the extra weight, it showed commitment, and bought him some more time in Detroit. The Pistons also had another player participating in his first training camp with the team, a big man who had been acquired at the deadline named Bill Laimbeer. So the pieces were falling into place, but the season started, and Johnson was still coming off the bench and not making much of an impact. John Long, on the other hand, was on fire, but a groin injury sidelined him for a few weeks. During that time, Johnson stepped in and delivered. VJ was finally getting real minutes, and over the next 16 games, he averaged about 18, 5, and 5, as well as a steal and a block, all while shooting over 52%. Extended minutes allowed Johnson to get into the flow of the offense, and even though he was returned to the bench in mid-December, he was fine with it as long as his minutes stayed high. They did, and so did his production. In the nick of time, Vinnie Johnson had showed the Pistons exactly what they had. A team that just a few months earlier were looking for Johnson's replacement now looked at him as a key piece of their future. By early February, he was a starter once more and continued his breakout season as a dangerous offensive player, all in all finishing as the team's third leading scorer on a career-high average, and the only Piston to shoot at least 50% from the field. His backcourt mate appreciated the pressure that he took off of him and how smart he was. To Isiah Thomas, every player should be like Vinnie Johnson. So the Pistons had found even more offensive firepower, yet their defense hadn't improved at all. Detroit had some moments, but they were still a few years away from competing, ultimately finishing with another losing record and again missing the playoffs, as Johnson's first full year in Detroit had seen him average about 16 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. It was another disappointing season, and with all the talent they had, management expected better. So going into '84, it would be a new era of Pistons basketball. Chuck Daly had just come off a rough NBA head coaching debut with the Cleveland Cavaliers 2 years prior, but Detroit took a chance, and Daly had a lot more to work with. And one of the first things he would do was return Johnson to the bench. It looked like Long would be on his way out, and a fight between he and Johnson during practice didn't help his case. But both men stayed, and Long was the starter. It seemed like a demotion for Johnson, but Chuck Daly knew exactly what he was doing. VJ spent the first few weeks readjusting to his role. Then in December, things started clicking.
The ball there, and here come the Pistons. Spinning down the lane, Vinnie running, right-hander, yes!
Vinnie Johnson loves it in the crowd. Basket counts and a foul. I love this player. Up in the pack, 6'1" again. He has no fear.
76ers. Isiah foul line. Vinnie double pump jump. Got it. Score it, and he's fouled. Now there's the one-on-one play of the game, huh?
Yep, the strength of Vinnie Johnson right there.
Vinnie Johnson was the definition of instant offense. Sneaky athletic and stronger than anyone defending him, forcing his way to his spots, then using his high release to get his shot off. Any shot was a good shot for Johnson.
Chuck Daly thinks so highly of Vinnie Johnson, he's given him the green light to go one-on-one anytime he wants to. He's such a competitor, and if he misses his own shot, he's going to go scrap in there and get the rebound at 6'1".
The sixth man became Vinnie Johnson's identity. It was a role that was never discussed between him and Daly. It was just understood, and with VJ leading the way, Detroit's second unit became one of the most dangerous in the league.
The Detroit second unit, though, was a major factor. They call them the A-team here in Detroit, Michigan.
Vinnie Johnson from Brooklyn, New York. so Texas brings the Pistons to within a bucket.
He's the captain of this A team, and believe me, they love him out there. How he does what he does is beyond me.
Detroit took a lot of shots and got a lot of second chances. They took a winning record into the All-Star break. And after the break, Vinnie and the Pistons played some of their best basketball. They went 26-14 down the stretch. For the first time since 1977, the Pistons were going to the playoffs, drawing Bernard King and the Knicks in round 1. The Pistons would have no answer for King, as the star forward averaged over 42 points for the series. And unfortunately, they weren't getting the best version of Johnson. Foot and ankle injuries hampered him over the first few games, as Detroit fell behind 2-1. Then while Johnson averaged 15 points the rest of the way, his shot still wasn't falling, and the Knicks outlasted the Pistons to take it in 5, as Johnson's season ended with him averaging about 13 points, 3 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. So overall, the season had been a success. Detroit's first winning record and first playoff appearance of the decade, and in the process, they had found their 6th man, and they weren't going to let him go. Johnson signed a multi-year offer sheet from the Knicks over the offseason, but Detroit was quick to match. So they had Johnson locked up long-term, but they still needed size and some defense. So they tried to address that with the addition of forward Dan Roundfield, and a word that Pistons fans hadn't heard for years started getting louder. Was Detroit finally a contender? The Pistons started the year looking the same, except Johnson had a slow start, and overall was up and down for most of the season. He didn't have a bad year, just not as good as his last 2 scoring-wise, but he made up for it with improved passing, an often unsung hero, and still a top-tier 6th man, one of the best isolation players in the NBA. Just give him the ball and chalk up 2 points. For VJ, it seemed like the more contested, the better.
Pistons within 8. Vinnie, take a daily baseline right. Did he fill that one up over him or what?
I'll tell you what, he shoots so well under pressure.
But the Pistons had gotten out of the gate fast, off to an even better start than last year, sitting at 11 games above 500 come the break. Yet they dealt with injuries and faltered down the stretch, going 16-17 the rest of the way. They were better than their 46-36 record, and now healthy going into a first-round matchup with New Jersey, they'd have a chance to show it. And they would. The Pistons were clearly the better team from the get-go. Johnson didn't have the best series, but he gave them some points, some assists, and some defense. And with a 3-game sweep, the Pistons were going to the second round for the first time in over a decade. But getting through the defending champion Celtics would be a bit tougher than the Nets. Johnson had a big game 1, yet over the next 2, he went cold, and Detroit was down 2-1. Then with a chance to even it before heading back to Boston, Vinnie Johnson got hot.
Vinnie Johnson running in. Vinnie Johnson. Vinnie Johnson is 5 for 5 in the 4th period. 1 minute to go. Vinnie Johnson. Timeout Boston. Vinnie Johnson is having an out-of-sight ball game. 22 points in this period. 22 of Detroit's 24.
So Johnson exploded for 34 points in a Pistons win. Detroit was down 11 to begin the 4th. They scored 26 points in the quarter. VJ was responsible for 22 of them. This series was tied. Back in Boston, Johnson dropped 30, including a 16-point second quarter. Detroit still lost. Then with Johnson losing his touch in Game 6, the Pistons saw their season come to an end. And on the year, Johnson had averaged about 13 points, 3 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. Detroit hadn't had much draft success since picking up Thomas and Tripucka in '81, but the '85 draft finally saw them hit another homer, taking a two-way guard out of McNeese State named Joe Dumars. They also beefed up their interior, trading Roundfield to the Bullets in exchange for tough guy Rick Mahorn. A couple more pieces added to the puzzle, but for now, the team still revolved around their trio of Thomas, Tripucka, and Laimbeer, and their dangerous bench unit led by super guard Vinnie Johnson. Detroit got out to a hot start, stumbled in December, and then saved their season with a 10-game win streak in February. Johnson was playing better than last year, fully comfortable in his sixth-man role, scoring better and more efficiently while putting up the lowest turnover numbers of his career and lowest turnover percentage in the league. Johnson may not have been looked at as a star, but his opponents would tell you that even when Isiah Thomas came out of the game, seeing Vinnie walk onto the court didn't mean things were getting any easier. Johnson even had a new nickname, but probably not the one you're thinking of.
Every time he would go up to shoot, you know, he'd shoot it and make it and say, "Ehoo," and he'd run back down the court. So first we was calling him Ehoo, and then it went from Ehoo to the Who, and we would just say, "Who him, who?" And when he would who him, we would say, "He hooed."
And Detroit needed him more than ever. After losing one of their best bench players from last year in Terry Tyler, Johnson could score with the best of them, and defenders were left scratching their heads trying to figure out how this short, stocky guard kept torching them.
How Vinnie Johnson, with those stubby little legs of his, manages to pick his way through that defense is beyond me. Look at, he dribbles the ball very high, little stutter step, but he's got great leaping ability for a small guy. I mean, he has no fear of 7'5".
No, he really doesn't.
He goes over anybody.
And this season would also be where he'd earn his much more popular nickname after a late November game against Boston, which saw him drop a career-high 35 off the bench. Following the game, Danny Ainge would say that if the Chicago Bears had the refrigerator, then the Pistons had the microwave. Defensively, Johnson had it a little bit harder because of his height, but he made it work. Not a lockdown defender, however, he knew his strengths, one being his strength, and he knew to trust in his teammates. Guys like Dumars, the rookie guard quickly proving to be a valuable addition. It was no coincidence that Detroit's mid-season turnaround coincided with him entering the starting lineup. A team that was sitting below 500 at the start of February recovered to turn in another 46-win season and a return to the playoffs to take on Dominique Wilkins and the Hawks. As usual, Detroit had no problems putting up points, and Johnson himself was scoring well, highlighted by a 23-point game too. However, it was a game the Pistons still lost, and that was because they couldn't stop a nosebleed. Atlanta averaged 122 points for the series, and Detroit's season ended a lot earlier than expected, knocked out after 4 games, as Johnson ended his year with averages of about 14 points, 3 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. The Pistons were clearly one of the most talented teams in the league. Their top players were in the prime of their careers. Their championship window was wide open, but they weren't getting over the hump. They tried to address defense with a 25-year-old rookie named Dennis Rodman. They had already found their shooting guard in Dumars, but they still felt they needed interior scoring and a closer. One of the greatest scorers of all time was unhappy over in Utah, so Detroit made a move. Tripucka was out, and Adrian Dantley was in. It was now or never. The Pistons stumbled out of the gate as they developed chemistry, but one guy who was keeping them competitive, even in the losses, was Vinnie Johnson. From the jump, Johnson was having one of the best years of his career. He played 78 games and was held to single-digit scoring in just 13 of those. He came into games and just took over, and he didn't need much time to do it.
And he comes out smoking, Vinnie Johnson. Not an easy thing to do to come off the bench cold and be able to produce, and Vinnie Johnson does a great job of it.
As soon as that first shot fell, the lid was off. It was a mentality Johnson had learned in Brooklyn. When you get the ball, find a way to get off a shot, contested or not, because if you give it up, you don't know if you're getting it back. Johnson was living up to his microwave nickname, a scoring machine with the ability to heat up in an instant. He was also a good passer, a physical defender, and an impressive rebounder for his size. Safe to say, Vinnie Johnson was much more than just a rotation player. Johnson would even finish second to Ricky Pierce in 6th Man of the Year voting. Surprisingly, it was the closest he'd ever get to the award, but you have to consider the era he was playing in. Size was still king, and Pierce at 6'4" was the smallest player by far to win the award up to that point. And it wouldn't be until 1999 that a player the same height as Johnson would take it home, when the Magic's Darryl Armstrong was honored. But that wasn't the hardware Vinnie or the Pistons were concerned with. Detroit as a whole were shifting their identity. They slowed things down. They worked for good shots instead of a lot of shots. Dantley's addition played a big part in that. Then they put an emphasis on physical defense, and it paid dividends. The Pistons won 52 games, tying a franchise record. But if they didn't make some noise in the playoffs, there would likely be some changes in the offseason. Round 1 brought an overmatched Washington Bullets team. Johnson was an effective scorer throughout the series and got his teammates involved, even dishing a postseason career-high 13 assists in Game 2. And while Washington put up a fight in Game 3, the Pistons made it out of Round 1 unscathed. Now they were looking for revenge, drawing Atlanta in the conference semis. However, this wouldn't be one of Johnson's better series. He averaged over 10 points, yet shot below 40%, but this was where you saw the evolution of the Pistons. Last year, Atlanta averaged 122 points. This year, Detroit held them to just below 102 points. Their defense was the difference, and the Detroit Pistons could finally place themselves among the league's elite.
As a matter of fact, this will be the first time that the Pistons have advanced to the finals in the conference since 1962 when they played the Los Angeles Lakers in the Western Conference.
From the Boston Garden, the Eastern Conference Championship Series with the defending world champion Boston Celtics. And for the first time in the history of the franchise, the Detroit Pistons in a conference championship series.
It only made sense that Detroit would need to get through Boston to get out of the East, and Johnson was a thorn in their side all series. He dropped 15 in Game 1, then 14 in Game 2, but Boston wouldn't be beat at home. Down 0-2 back in Detroit, the Pistons got back on track. Then just like 2 years prior, with a chance to even the series, Vinnie Johnson went off.
Larry Bird is defending Rick Mahorn.
Vinnie Johnson goes around a Mahorn screen, and he can heat up in a hurry. You know his nickname. Working against C-State. Vinnie Johnson has hit 6 of his last 7. Vinnie Johnson with 25.
The microwave caught fire, scoring 25 points on 60% shooting in a huge Pistons win. He stayed hot in Game 5, giving Detroit 20 off the bench, and after a last-minute turnover, it looked like the Pistons were going to steal one in Boston.
Give the ball to Detroit. Bird steals it. Johnson, layup, Boston, 1 second left.
A rushed inbounds, a Larry Bird steal, and a Dennis Johnson layup completely shifted the series momentum. 24 points from VJ back at home helped the Pistons force a Game 7, but a collision between Johnson and Dantley left the Pistons without Dantley for the entire fourth quarter. Boston held on at home, and the Pistons came up painfully short of their first finals appearance, as Johnson wrapped his season with averages of about 15.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. So it wasn't the desired result, but the progress was finally there. Detroit was so close, and they had to run it back. It had been a contract year for Johnson, and he had one of the best seasons of his career. His price tag would be high, but Detroit couldn't afford to lose their super sub if they wanted to make a title run. So Johnson was re-signed for 3 more years, and the Pistons began their quest for glory. The roster was set, the rotations were set, and the bad boys were born. Vinnie Johnson was more of a let his play do the talking kind of guy, but guys like Laimbeer, Mahorn, and Rodman spread their message with their fists, fouls, and good defense, with Rodman especially proving to be a difference maker. The Pistons were no longer a defensive doormat. They were tough and physical. No points were easy, and they became one of the hardest outs in the NBA. But that didn't mean they sacrificed scoring. Thomas was playing at an MVP level. Dantley was doing his usual damage, and Dumars was quickly becoming one of the best 2 guards in the league. And their second unit was still led by VJ. Detroit's scoring attack was much more balanced, so Johnson wasn't putting up the same points as last year. However, he was also struggling. He had his worst shooting season since his rookie year, and because of that, was playing some of his lowest minutes since arriving to Detroit. It was the worst slump that Daly had ever seen from Johnson, but he was still the microwave. He could catch fire at any moment, and the Detroit Pistons were the bad boys. They made life miserable for their opponents, and they just kept getting better. Last year they had tied a franchise record. This year they had set one with 54 wins, and secured their first division championship since 1956. The number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference, set for a first-round rematch with the Bullets. Johnson looked to have broken out of his slump near the end of the season, but he fell right back into it come the playoffs. Vinnie Johnson couldn't buy a bucket. The series went the distance, and VJ didn't crack double figures in a single game. The Pistons felt the absence of his scoring, barely making it out alive with a Game 5 blowout. On to the conference semis, where Detroit would be introduced to a new opponent. An up-and-coming Chicago Bulls team led by league MVP Michael Jordan were waiting for Detroit, and Vinnie Johnson still couldn't shake his slump. Over the first 2 games, he had shot a combined 6 of 22 from the field, and the Bulls had stolen one in Detroit. Finally, Johnson got back on track in Game 3 with 23 points, then chipped in 14 the next night as Detroit took both in Chicago before closing it out back at home. They were making a return to the conference finals, with a chance to redeem themselves for last year.
One of the Pistons playing with Vinnie Johnson. He came out sizzling in the series, Billy. 12 points in the first game, 21 in the second, but since then, he hasn't scored much. 13 points in the last 3 games.
How about the last 2 games? 2 points.
Detroit and Boston went back and forth, trading wins over the first 5 games. Johnson seemed to have shaken his slump at the beginning, yet was ice cold going into Game 6. But with a trip to the finals on the line, the microwave turned it on.
Vinnie Johnson connects. Vinnie Johnson at the line.
You can talk about great players in this league, but when Vinnie Johnson gets in that zone, there's no player any more dominant offensively.
Johnson caught fire early and had his best game of the playoffs, dropping a team-high 24 points off the bench. It won them the game and the series. The Detroit Pistons were making their first finals appearance in franchise history. Detroit had gotten through Larry Bird's Celtics, and now it was Magic Johnson's Lakers. Vinnie Johnson came out with 16 in a Game 1 win. He lost his shot over the next 2, shooting a combined 6 of 27, as the Pistons dropped both. But back-to-back 16-point games from Johnson helped Detroit swing the momentum and go up 3-2 heading back to LA. So at this point, a trend was forming. When Johnson played well, the Pistons won. So a 5-point Game 6 wasn't a good sign. However, an even worse sign was Isiah Thomas going down.
Isiah Thomas is hurt down on the court underneath the basket. I couldn't tell what happened.
He fought through it to turn in one of the most inspired performances in finals history, but Detroit came up 1 point short. Then in Game 7, with Thomas a lot more hobbled and Johnson struggling again, the Lakers completed the comeback, holding off a fourth-quarter Pistons push to deny Detroit their first championship, as Johnson finished his season with averages of about 12 points, 3 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. So it was another disappointing end to the season, yet the Pistons couldn't have gotten any closer. But Johnson had underwhelmed. The Pistons drafted guards, and Johnson's name was even coming up in trade rumors. But Detroit was right there. Why couldn't 89 be their year? The Pistons retained Johnson, and almost immediately, you could tell that this season would be different. Detroit had a new home, the Palace of Auburn Hills, and they sent an early message, beginning the year with 8 straight wins. They looked unstoppable. They couldn't keep that pace going, but they still looked like the team to beat in the East. Johnson was producing pretty similar to what he had done last year. Off the bench, his numbers looked the same, but where he really came through was in his fill-in duty, starting 21 games throughout the season and averaging about 18, 4, and 4 in those games. It really helped the Pistons keep their foot on the gas. But GM Jack McCloskey felt like something could be improved. You wouldn't expect him to trade away his top scorer, but that's exactly what he did. In the middle of a 7-game win streak, Detroit sent Dantley to Dallas. In return, they received the only player picked ahead of Isiah Thomas in the 81 draft, Mark Aguirre. As Daly explained, Detroit was looking to get younger. Aguirre could do a lot of the things Dantley did and had a longer shelf life. Initially, it was a shock, but McCloskey made the right move. Detroit went on a tear. The post-deadline Pistons went 31-6. Johnson had some big-time moments off the bench, like dropping 19 straight points in an early March win. It was one of 63 on the season. Detroit shattered the franchise win record, the most in the NBA. They looked like the best team in the league as they began their postseason with a familiar foe. This series would signal a changing of the guard out east. Larry Bird was breaking down, injury keeping him sidelined for the entire series. Vinnie looked to be heading into the same spiral as last year after a 1-for-9 shooting performance in Game 1, but it's about how you finish. And come Game 3, with Detroit 1 win away from a sweep, the microwave got hot. Johnson burnt the Celtics again and again, en route to a game-high 25 points. In a Pistons blowout, it was on to round 2 to take on the Bucks. An aging Milwaukee team would be nothing but a stepping stone for Detroit. Johnson would be one of 6 Pistons to average double figures, as the Pistons ran through the Bucks, moving on to the conference finals, still yet to experience a loss. The Pistons had been consistently improving, but Jordan and the Bulls were hot on their tail. Johnson had trouble finding his shot as the team split the first 4 games, but Johnson came through in the all-important Game 5, dropping 22 points, 16 of those coming in the final quarter, as the Pistons went up 3-2. And throughout this series, Detroit had been playing an especially physical brand of basketball to try and intimidate the Bulls. Jordan took a beating, but handled it well. Yet a young Scottie Pippen wasn't as prepared. By Game 6, he could only manage a minute on the court, and the Pistons took advantage, again atop the Eastern Conference, looking to take care of some unfinished business in the finals. Last year, Detroit was dealt a dagger with Isiah's injury. This year, the Lakers were banged up. Byron Scott missed the entire series, which forced Michael Cooper into the starting lineup, which meant that LA had no one coming off the bench to slow down Vinnie.
3 on the shot clock. Vinnie Johnson. He's done that all night. Again, penetration by Detroit. Vinnie Johnson. He has 10 points already in this quarter.
Vinnie always says, I don't care who's got a hand in my face. I'm hot. I'm hot.
The microwave was overheating. Johnson had one of the best series of his career. Over the first 3 games, he was averaging 18 points on 64% shooting. It was vintage Vinnie. Game 1 saw Johnson score 14 fourth-quarter points to give Detroit a 1-0 lead.
Detroit looking to take the lead. Vinnie Johnson will give it to him, and Vinnie Johnson drives, gets the basket, and draws the foul.
Vinnie Johnson. And there it goes. Vinnie Johnson hits another one. He is out of sight.
At the Forum, Detroit was pushing for the 3-0 stranglehold. Johnson went unconscious, hitting his first 6 shots of the fourth quarter to give Detroit the spark they needed for the win. Then with Magic's sideline for Game 4, VJ capped off his series with a nice 14, 6, and 5 stat line. Detroit completed their 3rd sweep of the playoffs. The result? The first championship in Detroit Pistons history. Vinnie Johnson had delivered on the biggest stage and wrapped up his overall season with averages of about 14 points, 3 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. The Pistons were world champions, and they had a team in place who were ready to challenge again. Johnson was aging, but after that finals performance, it looked like he had a lot left in the tank. Detroit was a championship favorite, but they didn't look the part over the first half of the season. The defense was elite, but their offense wasn't producing the points they needed. And out of everyone on the team, it was Vinnie Johnson who was struggling the most. VJ was playing the worst basketball of his career. After 45 games, he was averaging about 8 points on 38% shooting. The Pistons had always counted on him to will his way to points, but he was 33 and he was slowing down. And he was grieving, losing his father during training camp. Johnson wouldn't make excuses, but his teammates knew he was having a tough year. Detroit had also left Rick Mahorn unprotected in the expansion draft, so with him gone, James Edwards was made a starter. He was one of their best reserves last year, and Johnson couldn't carry the second unit on his own, but the Pistons needed more bench scoring. So midway through the season, Daly would address this. Dennis Rodman became a starter, and Aguirre became 6th man. It took pressure off of Johnson, and in his remaining 37 games, the microwave ran much hotter, dropping over 12 points a night on much improved shooting. The change also turned Detroit's season around. They won 22 of their first 23 after Aguirre went to the bench. It propelled them to the top, wrapping up the season with a conference-leading 59 wins, and looking much more dangerous as they began their title defense. Round 1 was quick work for Detroit. A young Pacers team proved no match, as Johnson played well in a 3-game sweep. Round 2 brought a new-look Knicks team, and while Johnson had his struggles over the first 3 games, he got back on track afterwards, shooting a combined 14 for 21 across games 4 and 5, as Detroit won both to take the series, making another return to the conference finals, and again taking on the Chicago Bulls. This series was a battle, Literally, the bad boys got physical, and Johnson got off on the right foot with a 10-point Game 1, then an all-around Game 2 performance with 18, 8, and 7. The Pistons won both convincingly and were in good shape heading back to Chicago. However, the Bulls protected home court. They put more focus on Johnson, and it worked. VJ couldn't get anything to drop, so instead, he got his teammates involved. The series went the distance as the teams traded blowouts over the final 3, but Detroit got the one that counted, winning Game 7 at home to advance to their 3rd straight NBA Finals. It was a new challenger out west. The Portland Trail Blazers, led by Clyde Drexler, a dangerous offense versus a dominant defense. The Pistons hoped to get a bit more offense from Johnson, but after 2 games, that looked unlikely. VJ had scored a combined 4 points, and Detroit had let Portland steal one at the Palace. But both games were close. A scoring presence off the bench was all the Pistons needed. Sure enough, come Game 3, someone plugged in the microwave.
Period 2. Vinnie Johnson. Basket counts and a foul. So VJ has come out and the microwave cooking for the first time. Vinnie Johnson looking to score big, is scoring big thus far. Extra pass by Laimbeer to Vinnie Johnson, and he's on fire.
Vinnie Johnson had come to life. 21 points in Game 3, 20 points in Game 4. He couldn't miss if he tried, and Detroit had taken a hold of the series, now up 3-1. But then came Game 5. Johnson was silent across the first 3 quarters. He broke that silence in the 4th.
Vinnie Johnson hits his first field goal of the game. Vinnie Johnson hits another one, and if he gets cooking, Rick Adelman's got deep problems. Basket will count and a foul. Johnson hits the basket, and it's 90-88.
Johnson scored 15 points in the final frame. He was leaving it all on the court. Then with seconds left, Johnson didn't call game. He called championship.
Vinnie Johnson with 1 second to go. His shot is good! With 7/10 of a second.
Unbelievable, George, that shot. What guts! What guts! It's 92-90! The microwave scores with 0.7 seconds left in the game!
Vinnie Johnson had come through in the NBA Finals for the 2nd straight year, cementing himself as one of the greatest clutch performers of all time, and also as a 2-time NBA champion.
Vinnie Johnson, the hero of the game. It took you a while to find your shot, but you finally found it at the right time.
Oh, couldn't have came at a better time, but...
As he ended his season with averages of about 10 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. Vinnie Johnson was a hero, but his contract was up. His agent and Pistons management went back and forth all summer until eventually they came to an agreement. Johnson was back for 2 more years and nearly $3 million guaranteed, and Detroit was thinking three-peat. Unfortunately for Pistons fans, it seemed like Vinnie Johnson was no longer what he once was. He had a solid start to the season, but come December, he couldn't get anything to fall, not giving the Pistons much on either side of the ball. But Detroit was having no issues. They won 13 of their first 15, then rattled off 11 straight in January. But come the end of January, Detroit would find a lot more value in Johnson. Isiah Thomas was lost for the next 2 months. During that period, Johnson would spend a lot of time in the starting lineup. He could play both guard positions and came through in a big way, averaging about 16, 4, and 4 until Thomas returned in early April. Detroit had definitely felt the loss of their star, but Vinnie kept them afloat as the Pistons turned in their 5th straight 50-win season and were set to take on Atlanta in round 1. And Johnson would be a big factor in this series. He got off to a slow start, but put up 17 in Game 3, then 26 in Game 4. The Hawks had pushed it the distance, but Detroit dominated Atlanta in the series decider. Next up was Boston. Johnson wasn't hitting a lot of his shots in this series, but that didn't stop him from taking them. And even when he did miss, he was crashing the offensive glass. VJ was on the attack from the opening tip. He scored in double figures in all but 1 game. And again, Johnson had a lot more pressure on him after Thomas aggravated a foot injury. So with Johnson starting the next 3 games, he averaged about 16 points and 6 boards, as Detroit won them all to punch their ticket to another conference finals matchup with Chicago. The Bulls had been closing the gap each year, and it was easy to see that this was a team that was prepared. However, so was Vinnie Johnson. He was Detroit's best player in the series. leading them in scoring on nearly 59% shooting. Johnson dropped over 20 points in each of the first 3 games, but Detroit found themselves reeling, down 3 games to none, needing to get a win at home just to stay alive. But Detroit's reign at the top came crashing down. The Bulls dismantled the Pistons to complete the sweep, and the three-peat hopes were over, as Johnson wrapped up his season with averages of about 11.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. Vinnie Johnson was no longer a consistent offensive force, but you could always count on him to deliver in the playoffs. However, it seemed that the Pistons were slowing down. Guys were getting older, and Detroit wanted some extra cap space. The first dominoes fell, and Vinnie Johnson was gone, leaving Detroit a Pistons legend, a man who embodied the tough, hardworking identity of the city, missing just 7 games during his decade with the team. But now a man without a job. He took this time to get knee surgery, but once he was recovered, Johnson inked a deal with the Spurs, joining them in mid-December and becoming a regular member of the rotation, even starting 23 games near the end of the year. And he made sure to give Pistons fans one last show at the Palace.
Welcome back to the Palace of Auburn Hills, where one-time Detroit Piston Vinnie Johnson is receiving a standing ovation, including applause from his former Detroit Piston teammates. Comes back to Vinnie. Well, that's a familiar sight here at the Palace.
Force him out of whatever the set play was.
Vinnie Johnson has 13.
Perhaps a bigger, a little bit stronger guy to play Vinnie Johnson and try and cool him off, but you need to stay on your feet, not give Vinnie a look at the rim. He's on fire right now.
Johnson's 17-point outburst was his best of the season. San Antonio won 47 games and took on Phoenix in the first round of the playoffs. Johnson got better with each game, but the Suns were a complete team with experience, and the younger Spurs were swept out of the postseason, with Johnson ending his year in San Antonio with averages of about 8 points, 3 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. The Spurs waived Johnson after the season, and the soon-to-be 36-year-old decided to hang it up after 13 seasons. But he was quickly busy and definitely enjoying life after basketball. Just like on the court, he made all the right moves in the business world as well. Shortly after his career was over, he founded Piston Automotive Group, an extremely successful auto parts supplier, which now generates over $3 billion annually, and has resulted in Johnson carrying an estimated net worth of $500 million as of 2025. But Vinnie never did it for the money. He got into business so he could create jobs and give back to the citizens of Detroit, who gave him so much support, with Johnson and the Piston Group routinely putting big money back into the Detroit community. Vinnie Johnson is a name that doesn't get mentioned enough. Whether you're talking all-time sixth men or the most clutch players to ever play, the microwave fits into both of those criteria. Few players have ever been able to single-handedly take over a game like VJ, and the way he did it with his one-on-one skills and ability to ignore any shot contest made it even more entertaining. Bad shots didn't exist for Vinnie Johnson, and with his strength, he took points whenever he wanted. When people talk bad boys, you often hear about Isiah and the physical defense, but the Pistons probably don't win either of those championships without the microwave. Vinnie Johnson earned everything he got and accepted lesser roles for the good of the team. A model player and a model professional, and one of the greatest pure scorers in the history of the game. But that's it for today's episode on Vinnie Johnson. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on one of his Pistons teammates, or this one on one of his draft mates. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.